recording. So I have the privilege to introduce our panelists for today's discussion. First, we have Laura Valley, pronouns she, her, hers. Laura has been with Dot UCF since spring 2017. Laura has received her master's degree in higher education policy studies from UCF. Laura is also a trained advocate who is passionate about making UCF the safest college campus in America. In her free time, Laura loves to spend time with her dog Sprinkles. And you can meet Laura at one of Dot UCF's many trainings throughout the academic year. Our next panelist is Emily Wente, pronouns she, her, hers. Emily works at Student Care Services, a non-clinical case management office that assists students facing distress by coordinating referrals. Emily's main role is to support students filing a Title IX complaint or responding to a Title IX complaint by offering remedial measures. Emily also assists with the Let's Be Clear campaign to educate students about sexual misconduct and interpersonal violence and resources available to those impacted. Emily started her journey at Student Care Services as a graduate student social work intern. Our final panelist, Michael Nunez, pronouns he, his, him, is the Student Life Coordinator for LGBTQ+ services, an office a part of the Department of Social Justice and Advocacy. He's a double alumni of UCF with his BA in psychology in 2016 and his MA in counselor education in 2018. During his graduate career, he was the graduate assistant for social justice and advocacy, and also was a clinical intern for Zebra Coalition, a LGBTQ+ homeless youth and resource center in downtown Orlando. Thank you all for being with us today. Please feel free to say hello to our audience. So we've compiled a group of questions to have our panelists answer that we hear often from those who want to support someone in an abusive situation. Our goal for this Q&A is to start a greater conversation on the topic and to raise awareness on such an important issue. So to start off our Q&A, Green Dot Coordinator Laura, how should someone respond who has been disclosed to?
That's a great question, Jess. Thank you all so much for being here today. For those of you who might not have ever had someone disclose to you before that they're experiencing abuse, this can be a little bit intimidating and albeit worrisome, especially if you really care about this person. You might feel like you don't want to say the wrong thing. You want to get them help. It can be a little overwhelming. And so we do have a little set of quick tips and tricks of the trade of what to do if your friend tells you you're experiencing abuse. First things first, we always say start by believing someone. Research shows us that if someone feels supported, example, by being believed by their friends, family, or the first person they disclose to, they're more likely to reach out for additional help and resources. And you can believe someone by simply saying something like, I am so sorry that this happened to you. Or you could even say, I believe you. But a lot of times for people who are experiencing abuse, these perpetrators have done everything that they possibly can to make this person feel alone and isolated. This person might not have any more friends and family left in their circle. They might even feel like it's their fault and that they deserved the abuse. And so by believing someone, we're validating that their experience happened to them and letting them know that it's not their fault and they're not alone. After saying something like, I'm so sorry that this happened to you, I like to follow that up with a question, maybe something like, what does help look like for you right now? If there was one thing I could do for you, what would you want that to be? How can I best support you? Like, what do you want my role to be in this? They're telling you for a reason. They're trusting you with their experience. And as I mentioned before, perpetrators, they're very well versed in this. And the act of a victimization is very isolating. And this person has had their power taken away from them. So what we can do as a bystander is give them that power back. One of the best ways you can give someone the power back is by allowing them to make a choice, by allowing them to tell you where they want you to be is a small decision for them to make to help them get the power back. And they might tell you, you know, I just wanted to tell you, I don't really know what I want to do. Maybe they want to take a nap. Maybe they want to go out to eat. Maybe they just want to think about it a little bit more. If they're not really sure what they want to do, this would be a great time for you to share out some incredible resources that not just UCF has, but the Orlando community. And we're going to talk a lot about those resources throughout this presentation, so I don't want to give them all away right now, but if someone does share with you that they don't know their next steps moving forward, I would recommend pulling up a list of confidential and not confidential places for them to maybe seek additional help.
Thank you, Laura. I really appreciate that response of start by believing, and like you said, making sure the power lies with the one that's disclosing. Thank you so much for that. Next, we're going to go to Student Life Coordinator for LGBTQ+ services, Michael. How could a friend support someone in this type of situation?
So thank you. I think this is a great question because this is something that we deal with a lot within our office, within many of the different roles I've been a part of. So to first break this down, so being outed means to disclose someone else's sexual orientation or gender identity, and that they have not come out to someone else. So coming out is telling those people about your identities, about yourself. And oftentimes we kind of think about coming out as, oh, this person has come out and they've come out to everyone, but that's not necessarily always true. So we have a lot of maybe students, some of our friends who may be out in some spaces, maybe they're out to their friends and to their professors and to like student groups, but they may not be out to their family at home. So often when they're not out, like that can be for a multitude of reasons. They may not be ready. They may fear what their parents are going to say or do. So being outed can be very dangerous for these individuals. So to support a friend who is being threatened to be outed, it's really about connecting them to those resources. So I always say worst case scenario, what will happen? So whether that be this person is going to be outed to their family or maybe to their employer, are you worried that your employer will treat you differently? Are you worried that your family will cut you off maybe financially? And if they're going to cut you off financially, what do you need to think about? So is that your, maybe the car they drive is under their parents' name. So what about that? Or their phone plan, insurance, all of those things need to be taken account of and said, okay, if my parents react negatively, if my friends react negatively, like, will I still be okay? What do I need? So really kind of sitting with your friend in that point and saying, okay, what can we do to make sure you're safe if this happens?
Thank you, Michael, for really educating us on how complex that part can be for somebody in this situation. I love how you talked about being out in different groups within your own community. That might be something that a friend might not have even thought of. So I really appreciate you letting us know about that. Next, we're going to go back to Laura with Green Dot. Laura, what would you say for this question?
All right, so how could you intervene if you see that your friend is experiencing abuse? There's so many different ways that you can intervene, but before you do any type of intervention method, whether it's proactive or reactive, I would certainly recommend taking a step back and determining whether or not this friend is currently experiencing the abuse, like if they're still in that relationship with the abusive partner or not, because that could change the way you intervene. Your safety is always the most important. I'm sure you've heard this phrase worded a bunch of different ways, but one of the ways is you can't help someone else if you can't help yourself. We want to make sure that you are okay and that you are safe so that you are in a place to get this person help. That being said, there's reactive ways you can intervene and there's proactive ways. When I say a reactive intervention, I mean you are seeing the violence happening in front of you and you are responding to that act of violence. The methods that we have are to be direct, to delegate, and to distract, the 3Ds. A direct intervention is what a lot of people picture when you hear bystander intervention. So this is you are directly addressing either the person who's being harmed or the person who's receiving the harm. And if you're addressing the person who's receiving the harm, you might say something like, hey, are you okay? I just want to check in on you. I noticed you're not showing up to class anymore. And I know you're my buddy in class, like we sit next to each other, like what's going on? It could just be a simple check-in. If you're direct towards the person who's doing the harm, you might say something like calling out the specific behaviors that you're seeing, like, hey, why are you screaming? Why are you grabbing their arm like that in public? Hey man, like, why are you looking at their social media? Didn't they block you? Like, kind of like calling it out what you see. That might be a way to be direct towards someone. A delegating reactive intervention is when you're reaching out to someone else that you trust to help you intervene in that scenario. And a lot of times at UCF, people will delegate to student life advisors like RAs, orientation leaders. You could reach out to your advisor, a supervisor, a staff member, anyone that you trust to help you get help. Now, we always recommend that if there's any type of weapon involved in the abuse that your friend is experiencing, that you delegate to someone that is trained to work with that, like law enforcement. But you can also delegate to reporting offices like Student Care Services, LGBTQ+ services, Title IX, victim services. And then the last one is distract, our distract reactive intervention. And that's when you're using whatever's in your toolkit to help you intervene for the person who's being harmed, the person who's receiving harm, whoever, in enough time to kind of diffuse the situation. A lot of the common things we hear are people pretending to spill a drink on someone. And no worries, you don't have to pay for a drink. You can like ask for a free water or something, pretend it's a drink, and you like spill it on someone. Sometimes people will say things like, oh, aren't you in my math class? Like, I have a question about the homework. Oh, I think that's your car being towed. You should go check on that. Random dance parties. I mean, really, you name it, like whatever it is to distract the situation. And that's going to look different for a lot of different people, depending on what the situation is, your personality traits, like how comfortable you are. So those are reactive interventions. We also have proactive interventions. And these are things that you can do when you're not necessarily seeing the violence happening firsthand, but you're hearing about it and or it has not happened yet. And you want to let people know that you don't tolerate this in your space. And so maybe if you're out to eat with your friend and the abusive partner, maybe making statements like, oh yeah, I went to this bystander training the other day and I learned about XYZ. Having posters in your room or in your car, in your office that describe things that you're passionate about. Social media is a really big one, especially right now during a pandemic. A lot of us are online. And so what is your online presence saying about what you tolerate and what you don't tolerate? And that way, if the abusive person happens to look at your social media profiles, they know like, all right, I'm not going to mess with this person.
Thank you, Laura. It was a very good response. And I think you gave a lot of options in this circumstance, which is, I think, what makes it so difficult, because you highlighted safety as the biggest component to make sure you're doing it in a safe way. And you gave us a lot of options to think about what ways we can be most impactful, but also be safe. So thank you. So our next question is going to be for Emily. What things should I be mindful of to recognize if my friend is in trouble? Emily, what should they be mindful of?
So some things that are important to be mindful of is noticing some changes in behavior. So if your friend starts acting differently than they usually do, so this could be anything from change in personal hygiene, dramatic weight gain or loss, irritability, unruly behavior, impaired speech, disjointed thoughts, tearfulness, intense emotions, inappropriate responses, difficulty concentrating, physically harming themselves, destruction of property, anxiety and panic, frequently falling asleep, loss of contact with reality, written references to death, dying, or suicide, disconnection from you, friends, other family, things like that, hyperactivity or rapid speech, preoccupation with gaming, social media, online personas. So just kind of noticing how they were behaving, and if things are starting to change, maybe check in. Some other ways that changes can happen are in academics. So maybe there's many requests for extensions, special considerations, disruptive classroom behavior, excessive absences or tardiness, avoiding or dominating discussions, career and course indecision, excessive procrastination, uncharacteristically poor preparation performance, references to suicide or harm to others in verbal statements or writing. And then lastly, some changes maybe in interpersonal relationships. So always asking for help with personal problems, dependency, withdrawing from social situations, disruptive behavior, inability to get along with others, complaints from others. So these are just some examples of how things could maybe change for somebody who is maybe experiencing abuse. And so things that are important to note is acknowledge that recovery time and healing may take longer than you think. Listen to and support your friend. Use non-judgmental language, pay attention and don't interrupt. Let them know you care. Assess their safety as well as your own safety. So going back to what Laura said, it's very important that you both are very safe when you're having this conversation. And if not, getting someone like the police involved. And respect the person's wishes to the best extent you are able, and do not force them to do what you think they should. So sometimes we may have opinions of what maybe should happen next, but it's very important to let your friend know that you care and you hear them and you're here to support them regardless of what decision they make.
Thank you, Emily. A lot of things to kind of be thoughtful of when it comes to a friend, like you said. A lot of things that they might not be taking care of themselves or concerning things. And I love how you tied it into Laura's topic of being safe and being non-judgmental, coming from a caring and compassionate kind of approach to your friend. So thank you for that response. Next, we're back with Michael at LGBTQ+ services. Michael, how can support be offered in this type of situation, would you say?
There we go. I'm still learning Zoom, y'all. Okay, so I think, of course, like doing everything that my co-panelists, Laura and Emily, have talked about, I think understanding that like this person is LGBTQ, but they're also still a person. So like all of these ways that you're intervening, that you're really supporting them is also so important. And it's good to make them feel that they have you there in their corner. But I want to talk about maybe some specifics in relation to the LGBTQ+ community that people may not really think about in this kind of scenario. So first of all, we often have these conversations around, oh, well, not like LGBTQ+ people don't get into abusive relationships, like these stereotypes or the ideas that, oh, well, it's not reported, so like it must not happen. And it really, like, we all know that's not true. Like these things do happen, they're just underreported because people may not feel comfortable going to maybe law enforcement or different offices. And that can be for a multitude of reasons. Within my graduate program, we actually had a really good discussion around LGBTQ+ intimate partner violence. And one of the main reasons that we saw that queer couples wouldn't report any abuses, the model minority status. So they felt they couldn't report abuse because if I tell this person, like, what are other people going to think about the LGBTQ+ community? Like, we can't give the community a bad name. We have to deal with this on our own, which can be so isolating and so hard for people to feel that they have to carry an entire community's like respect on their shoulders and that they don't have people they can go to. And then, of course, like the comfort of going to different people or maybe their workplace, whether it be, and then even the concept that some people don't believe like, oh, if it's two men in a relationship, why didn't you just fight back? Or if it's two women, it's like, well, then who could be the aggressor? So there are so many of these like stereotypes that people just don't challenge when it comes to LGBTQ+ relationships. And then that's not even touching on our transgender like population, our transgender students or friends. And well, like, oh, so did they know? Or like all of those different conversations that can be really invalidating to their identities. So it's a really hard scenario for them to choose between their own comfort and if the person they're going to will be knowledgeable about the community enough to help them in these scenarios. So how to support your friend who is always to show, as both my co-panelists were talking about, show that you support them, whether that be in social media, like sharing that, like, oh, I'm an ally to the community, like I'm here to learn. At the beginning, I really appreciated it, but introducing yourself with your pronouns is like a very small but very affirming aspect of like, oh, hey, I'm knowledgeable about pronouns, the LGBTQ+ community, like trans identities. So if someone needs something, especially as important as these topics, they know, oh, this person knows not only about like domestic violence, how to help, but they know about my identity. I can go to these people.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate the insight of that added pressure that somebody in an LGBTQ plus abusive relationship might be experiencing. That is something that's would be added on to them in the situation. And just talking about how we can support somebody in that type of situation with everything else that's going on. So thank you for educating us on that. And for this question, we're going to be with Emily. Again, what options might be there for someone who's concerned about their friend regarding abuse in a relationship?
So again, it's very important to, respect their wishes to the extent you're able, but there are times where maybe you will need to get the police or someone else involved. So a couple different options that you have is calling Student Care Services, my office, to discuss your concerns and seeing what you can do. Do you need to file a student of concern report? Would counseling be more appropriate for this person? Do they need a victim advocate? Our office can really help you kind of navigate what those options are or getting that person scheduled. So you can reach us by calling 407-823-5607. Or if you feel that it is falling under a student of concern and you want to submit a report, you can go to our website at scs.sdes.ucf.edu to file a student of concern report, which will prompt our office to reach out to that individual, check in, see how they're doing, and then offer them resources and support. You're always welcome to walk a student over to counseling and psychological services. Right now with the pandemic, they are trying not to take too many walk-ins, but you're welcome to call on the way over there and see if they're able to take someone coming in, or you can call their hotline and speak to a counselor on call. If you feel that it falls under our Title IX policy of interpersonal violence, sexual misconduct, you can submit a Title IX report at letsbeclear.ucf.edu. Again, calling a victim advocate is always a great first step because that's that confidential resource that can meet with you and your friend, really go over what those options are, and what you discuss is going to stay between you two unless there's immediate safety concerns. So you can reach them again at 407-823-1200. And lastly, there's always the option of calling the police. So if it is an emergency, we encourage you to call 911. If it's not an immediate emergency, maybe that person wants to file a report or speak with an officer, you can call the UCF non-emergency number at 407-823-5555. And lastly, you're welcome to always connect with faculty and staff, talk about your concerns, see what they suggest for you and where they can help navigate you to.
Thank you, Emily. You did that. You got everything there for us. You talked about CAPS, the counseling office. You talked about your office, CARES, Title IX, our office, victim services, law enforcement, talking to faculty and staff. So there seems to be quite a few options for someone to consider when they are concerned about a friend. So thank you for kind of putting all that out there for us. So at this time, we've discussed some important topics on how to offer support to a survivor. So let's discuss the following scenario and see where this individual might find some support. Now, this is based off of real events, but we have changed any identifying information to protect confidentiality. So a UCF student, Sam, discloses to their roommate/friend, Pat is in a physically abusive relationship. Pat is not ready to end their relationship or report the abuse. Sam tells you that they are worried about their safety and Pat's safety. So we've got Sam, who's a UCF student, and their roommate/friend, Pat, is in an abusive relationship, and they kind of are concerned what to do next. So at this time, our chat is going to be opened up to allow public comment from you all. As a reminder, if you are wanting to be unmuted, just use that raise hand icon and we'll unmute you if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question. So after reading this scenario, let's talk about what we think. I know that we've all listened to the Q&A and we've heard some great answers from our panelists, and let's try and apply that to this scenario. And panelists, feel free to also discuss with us. We'd love to get your insights in this situation. So first question for you all, what makes Sam's situation tough? And we'd love to have you raise your hand to be unmuted or go ahead and type your response in the you all, for example, spotlight and Pat was your name, your friend. What ways do you think you could support your friend Pat? Let's hear what you guys think. And panelists, if you have any input on the 2 questions we've gone over, feel free to jump in too. So we've got, I think in this situation, Pat should be informed on his options and Sam should relay some of his observations and explain his concern. So that reality does sound like she's coming from wanting to know that Sam is coming from a caring place for Pat and wants them to be educated on what's their options. We also have a comment from Christina, start by giving them these resources. So I think that's a great comment, Christina, kind of like Brianna was saying, is educate them on what options and resources are there so that they can make maybe a decision that's best for them. We also have Megan that says, tell them to reach out to a service that's specifically dealing with the needs. I did maybe with there's other people on the floor who might think.
I just asked her if he sounds like he's not actually
There's always only people those that have not just and I come with a